Welcome back to the OurView Podcast. On today's episode, I welcome my guest, Dr. Michelle Fynan. Join our conversation as we discuss how disability impacts sexual self-esteem. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in to another episode of the OurView Podcast, where we aim to raise awareness, educate, and change the tone of conversation about disabilities. I'm very excited for this conversation today, and I would love to welcome my guest, Dr. Michelle Fynan. And we are going to have a great conversation today centered around disabilities and relationships. And really excited because this will be a two-part episode that we are going to have here. So welcome to the show. And can you just introduce yourself and tell us who is Dr. Michelle Fynan?
Ooh, well, thank you so much for having me. I'll kick it off by saying, who is Dr. Michelle Fynan? I'm an Arthur Aston fan. I'll say that. We'll kick it off there. I'm so glad that we crossed paths on Clubhouse, my new addiction.
Yes.
Had the pleasure of sharing a space with you, and I'm so glad we were able to connect. I love your content. I love your energy. Your heart just comes across in the shares that you put out there. So I love it.
Thank you.
So I'm a fan. I'm a wife. I'm a wife to an amazing man, the most amazing man, a mom to two little girls. I'm a woman with a physical disability. I'm a disabled sex doc, a board certified clinical sexologist, a licensed mental health counselor, and really just stepping into this space of doing sex, intimacy, and relationship coaching virtually. Thanks, pandemic.
Yes.
But I love the accessibility that has brought for people, that virtual, platform. So I'm extremely passionate about supporting people in the healing process around getting the love that they want and deserve. That's my thing.
That's great. And I thank you so much for the compliments you gave me. That was
Of course, the truth bombs.
Yeah, thank you. So it's really great to hear how I love hearing how other people introduce themselves. And when it comes down to it, it's your wife and a mom, and and the passion that you have for the job that you do. And again, Clubhouse is my new addiction as well. It's just so great, and the conversations that people that we're able to have on there, and to connect with other people with disabilities. So many people with disabilities are able to share their stories, and the ability to network with other people there has been tremendous. So
amazing.
Yeah, so it's great to have you on here today, and
Thank you.
I'm excited to have this conversation because, as we discussed before I started recording, that people with disabilities, there are so many stereotypes and negative things thought about them in regard to relationships and the ability to have relationships, or um, and so it's really great to have this conversation to um, to start breaking down that stereotype, and just to shed some light into your experience and with the work that you do. So I'm really excited. And in your introduction, you said that you do have a disability. Can you get into what your disability diagnosis is, and how the diagnosis has impacted your daily life?
Yeah, so I have osteogenesis imperfecta. I was born with that, and that's a big name, OI for short, but it's more commonly known as brittle bone disease. And it's classified as a rare disease. And no one in my family had OI when I achieved this status due to a spontaneous genetic mutation. So I was the only one in my family with a physical disability. And with it affecting my bones, it really affects the type 1 collagen, which is throughout your body. So it's, your ligaments are lax, there's collagen in your organs, your lungs, your heart, your skin, just bruising easily. But most notably, it's a brittle bone disease, as that has like the biggest impact. I've had somewhere around 35 to 40 fractures, and I'm actually rocking a broken toe right now. I don't even count fingers and toes or ribs in my lineup. That would be just, I would lose count when it comes to that. Um, I've had 10 or so surgeries, including spinal fusion surgery for scoliosis. And I used a wheelchair until my junior year of high school, and other mobility devices as I grew up. That's kind of the nature of the disease. As you're, growing, there's a lot of fractures when there's a lot of bone turnover with the
Right.
growth.
Mhm.
And then as things kind of level out, they level out, and then they go down again as you
Yeah.
get older. So I've had this, I've been riding the wave, if you will. And I would say that being in a chair had a big impact on
Mhm.
me growing up. And I was very shy. And to know me, that's really not a part of my personality. I'm an extreme extrovert. That's one of the reason why Clubhouse is like lighting my flame right now, because I just love that connection with people. Um, but I used to be very shy, and it was really more so because of the shame that I internalized about my disability and who I was as someone with a disability, and just the label of disability in general. And
Mhm.
it affected my dating life. I never dated, I never had romantic relationships, and I really believed that love was just not in the cards for me. And I guess you can say that led me on my journey here.
Yes. That is it's so great when I'm able to interview and talk with other people who have disabilities and how their personal life has led to what they are now doing professionally.
Mm,
So it's your experience of, not dating and wondering if love was in the cards for you, as you said, how that led you to what you're doing and the work that you're doing. So that's really, really great when that happens. And I think it happens a lot of times with people who have disabilities. Um, they see something that's missing in the world,
mm,
in their own world. And for me, I've mentioned it before. My goal of uh, majoring in psychology was to help other families who had people with children with disabilities, because it impacts the
yes.
whole family unit. So I wanted to share that with other people and my experience of living in a family, as again with the only person who has a disability in my family as well,
Mhm,
and how that can change things in a family. So
mhm.
so it's great to see that you are working towards something that you saw that was missing in your own life. So that's really cool. um
Yeah.
yeah. So how can you talk a little bit more about how living with a disability has impacted your sexual self-esteem and your acceptance of self? Because I know that's a really big
Mm.
no, that was a really big thing for me, where it's just like, would people want to, get to know me,
Yeah,
in a romantic kind of way? Like, yeah, I have a bunch of friends and, they're great, love them all. But it's just like, would somebody want to, um, get to know me, like I said, in a romantic kind of way? And it's just,
yeah.
and it can be discouraging at times. To
Mhm,
like you said, to feel like, maybe love is not in the cards for you, maybe it's not meant to happen. So can
mhm.
you just talk a little bit about that and how
Yeah,
you went about becoming more accepting of yourself?
yeah, yeah. I would say I really didn't have any sexual self-esteem. really. And I say I think they're totally different,
Hmm.
the sexual self-esteem and versus just self-esteem in general, because I think a lot of times when we reflect, we could have good self-esteem. Like, I know I'm a great friend, I know I'm a great human. Like, that could be in a different category altogether than maybe where our sexual self-esteem resides.
Right.
So, and those are different relationships, right? Like you said, I know I've got great friends, love you, mean it, but what about over here, which
Right.
is maybe what we're looking for. So I, I really love working with people who are not even convinced that it's a possibility, because I was that person, you
Hmm.
know? I didn't even entertain the idea that this is something that someone could find me sexually attractive. And I think because of that, I really did shut down any possibilities that might have been there. Like, even today, to look back, I'm like, no, I don't think I had even any possibilities, but I'm sure I did. I'm
Uh-huh.
sure I did. But showing up energetically in this way that it was just like, nope, it people pick up on that a lot more than I think we would like to
Yes.
admit, know? Um,
Yeah.
I mean, like I said, the way you present yourself, even on social media, I'm able to pick up on your energy, and I'm just like, oh, yes, this is going to be a great conversation. And this is our first time being on a call together,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
So we're able to pick up as humans, I think, just a lot more than we really let on to. Um, so my sexual self-esteem was like non-existent, if I'm going to
Hmm.
be honest. And I mentioned there was like a bell curve to the way disability for me was experienced, in that it went from, severely affecting my mobility to then I was no longer in a wheelchair. I was, walking without assistance. I was doing this dance between like visible and invisible disability,
Hmm.
you know? And so even once I was no longer in that space of like, to look at me, maybe you wouldn't automatically see how disability was affecting me, the mindset was still there.
Right.
And I wasn't ever going to find what I was looking for until I shifted that mindset.
Hmm. Yeah, that is it's so important. I've said it in previous episodes with the self-talk that we have with ourselves and how important that is. Just with anything, with just getting through some days, some rough days that we might
Yeah.
have. The way that we talk ourselves through things and the way that we see ourselves is definitely impacts the way that we present ourselves to others. And it's
Mhm.
and I think again, like, we don't really pick up on that. And having you say, you can tell from my post on social media, and just the way going back and forth in the emails and talking, and just you can really pick up on certain things from people,
Mhm.
but we don't I don't know if we want to ignore it or just choose to not pay attention to it, but it is something
Mm,
that we have to pay more attention to. I agree with that for sure.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So that is so that leads to the next question of when did you start to realize the shift
Mm,
in those types of things in your life? At what point did you notice that things were
mhm.
changing for you?
So I did at that point what researchers do, and I'm a researcher, and I just dove headfirst into the study of human behavior. And I thought, if I could just brain my way through this, I would be able to play the part and get what I want, right? So I studied men. That was what I was interested, in finding. Like,
Hmm.
I studied men. I dove deep into online dating, and I was like just head first trying to think my way through it. And I
Hmm.
consider this like my process of like learning how to swim. But what I really wanted to actually do is dive, right? Because we could swim
Wow.
and like we could get a few dates, but like, did I want dates or did I want love? So
Hmm.
I had to get clear with myself on that. And, I think until you're willing to dive inward and to really accept all of those parts of you, including the parts that you tend to hide, the parts that we just kind of tuck away into the caves and the shadows and,
Right.
you know, the stuff that we don't want to address, that they're fine. It doesn't mean that the dark is bad, right? It's just things that we are hiding.
Right.
Um, and until you're willing to go there, you're not going to enjoy the
Hmm.
adventure,
Right.
and all that you see when you're diving. And I use that analogy because I got my open water scuba certification, and you could very easily just stay in your head and be afraid of like the fact that you're really deep below where you're supposed to be breathing,
Right.
and you're relying on this other thing. And it's like, it's a lot. And you can get in a headspace of not being able to enjoy it. And that goes back to what you said, where it's like our perception is,
Hmm.
is so important there.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. I love that you got your scuba certification. That's really awesome.
It's fun if you could keep the anxiety at bay.
Right.
It could be fun.
Right. That is one of the things I've always wanted to do. Always wanted to scuba dive. So maybe I'll have to do
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
Yes,
But
I will hold space for you trying that.
yes, yes. So you mentioned the online dating, and I know this wasn't an original question that I had planned to ask. um,
We got to
but
go off course, don't
yes,
we?
yes, just a little bit. But do you have for people who have disabilities, for for myself, I'll speak for me. And this, for those of you who know me who are listening to this podcast, this will probably shock the absolute crap out of people. Um,
Yes.
but that's what the podcast is for. I've had so many people say like, "Oh wow, didn't know that about you." So I
Perfect.
I did try the online dating thing once or twice. Um, and my experience has been, if I put a picture of myself in my wheelchair
Mhm.
or using my crutches, I get no response. But then if I do like a headshot or just me sitting in a regular chair, not showing my crutches or my wheelchair, I get responses. But then as the conversation starts and we get into, oh, well, what do you do? Oh, I work for a nonprofit that builds inclusive playgrounds for people with
Mm.
disabilities. Oh, wow, that's interesting. How did you get into that job? Well, I was born with a disability. And then it turns into a, hey, are you still there? Are you going to
Hello,
respond?
is this thing on?
Right, is this thing on? Like,
Hmm.
so do you have any input on how people with disabilities can approach the online dating world? Because now, especially over the last year, we've all been in the pandemic, I
Hmm.
know. So going out and really meeting people in a face-to-face manner, is those options are few and far between these days,
Right.
especially in the states where we get snow, like here in New Jersey. We're not eating outside these days for the next few
Yeah.
months. Yeah. So do you just have any pointers that you could offer?
Yeah. And I wish it was as easy as like, here's my formula. I
Right.
discovered the key, you know?
Hmm.
But it really is feeling into what works for you. Now, I will share this, and I think that this was a mindset shift for myself. When I was going through that same thing where I'm experimenting, right? I'm a
Hmm.
scientist, I'm a researcher,
Right.
I'm experimenting. I'm going to test it with this photo. Oh, that didn't do it. I'm testing this. And I experienced the same results where there would be crickets for
Hmm.
some and then not for others. But what I found was also important was that correlation does not mean causation. So with what that means is, just because there were crickets with this photo of me in my chair does not mean that that's the reason why.
Right.
And in working with other people who are also navigating the online dating space, I work with a lot of able-bodied people who will get crickets based on just the pictures that they're choosing.
Hmm.
So it's really, there isn't a yes or a no. Now, what I
Right.
will say is, the way I nabbed my husband, no. And I don't know if this is like, do as I say, not as I do, whatever it is. I'm just going to share
Right.
my experience. I chose not to, at that point, include anything about that part of me, about my disability online.
Hmm.
And we connected, we met on match.com. We
Oh,
talked
that's
for
great.
a very long time. Yes, we're a match.com wedding.
Yay.
And and there came a time when I felt that it was time for me to do this big reveal, you know.
Hmm.
And leading up to it, I was, trying to convince him that I was going to introduce him to this friend, and, oh, you would be so great with this person. And he's like, well, what about you? And that just speaks to where I was at. Like, this guy matched with me, and I was still trying to find him someone else, because I was like, you matched with me, but obviously you just are here for me, for my connections to my
Right.
friends. What?
Right.
Okay, so check your headspace, you
Hmm.
know? Um, and when I shared that I did have a disability, it did not affect the way he viewed me. He
Right.
saw that as a part of me that I just hadn't shared yet, much like there were so many parts of him that he hadn't shared with me. And I
Right.
think sometimes, as people with disabilities, maybe we've kind of gone through life where we have been in a space where we've had to share a lot with medical doctors there, or, maybe we're the token person, and
Yes.
people ask a lot of questions, and we feel like there's this mandatory, I have to explain myself.
I have to put it all out
And
there right away.
yeah, yeah, and there's no personal information.
Right.
And I think it's important to look at that. These are all things, when I say it's important to look at that, these are all things that we could journal about, or we could have discussions about in Clubhouse,
Hmm.
or just with friends, because those things shape how we show up in
Right.
scenarios. And as far as people not responding, you know, and of course, I understand that it's easier said from where I'm sitting, where I am married now. And back then, if someone were to say, just keep on showing up, it's like, I have been, like,
Right.
it's tiring,
Yes.
but keep on
Yeah.
doing it.
Yeah.
The only way to find what you're looking for is to keep going.
Yeah. And I love what you said about the way, as a person who has a disability, we have been in many situations where our disability is the immediate question that is asked, or it's
Mhm.
the first thing, one of the first things we have to talk about. And
Mhm.
especially for people with physical disabilities, where, as you said, being a wheelchair user, and like myself, being a wheelchair user or crutches, you can't miss it. Like, I'm
Right.
coming and you see my chair, you see my crutches, and it's so naturally I think people are going to talk about that when you meet people in person.
Mm.
But then in any relationship, there are things that you slowly talk about. You
Yes.
disclose things slowly. And I
Yes.
think, again, saying, for people who have the physical disabilities that you can see, the visible disabilities that you can
Mm.
see, you feel like it's something you have to talk about. It's like the elephant in the room. Like, you
Right.
see me in the chair, so it's going to come up eventually. So I'll just say it now, and I'll
Mm.
and I'll get it out of the
Mm.
way. But I think it was important, that you mentioned, from your husband's perspective, that it was, there were things that you slowly learned about him over time as well. It
Yeah.
wasn't just everything out on the table on, the first couple of
Right.
times you went out. So I
Right.
think that's very important. That you see my chair, but we don't have to talk about it right now because there are so many other things about me um,
Right.
that make
Right.
me an interesting person. And it's so funny because when I do my presentations in schools, I introduce myself, and saying that I have spina bifida is the last thing that I say. I
Mhm.
always say all the other things first. I'm a son, I'm a brother, I'm an uncle, I'm a friend. I like to swim. I like to take long car drives. I love the beach. And then
Yes.
I say maybe 10 things. And then I'm like, and I was born with spina bifida that impacted my mobility, and I have to use this wheelchair and crutches. So it's a very similar thing where it's like, yes,
Yeah.
there's so many other things about me and every other person to talk about besides the disability. So I'm
Yeah.
sorry we went off course, but I'm glad we did.
I love going off-roading.
Yeah, so that was
Love
really
it.
so that was really great. And because it really made me think, and I was like, wow, like, yeah, I have been in situations where my disability has to be the first thing we talk about, like you said, doctor's appointments, and
Right.
just
Right.
in general of when you apply for a job, it's like, well, what do you need? What accommodations do you need? So you have to talk about your
Yeah.
disability if you choose to disclose it. But
Yeah.
um so it's like, why should it be, some people may feel like, well, it has to apply everywhere where I have to talk about it right
Mhm.
away, and it's like, that's not true. So
Right. You have
yeah,
to feel into what feels good for you. If
right,
it feels good for you to put yourself out there as like, this is me. And if you're not going to respond to this picture, then like, fine, I'm weeding people out in that way. Or
yes,
you can say, I want to get to know someone before I disclose something personal about me. And I think everyone feels differently about that, but we should be mindful of whether or not we feel pressured to share because of this um, experience of almost having to disclose or
right,
just becoming chronic oversharers in our lives. Like, am I this person who maybe overshares because of my experience? We need to check ourselves, right? So
yeah.
it's important that we have that discussion.
Yes, that's so great. That is, it's so true because we do, like you said, we overshare. And I think as almost as a society as a whole, with
Mm.
social media, we get into the habit of oversharing things, and
Yeah.
everybody needs to
Yeah.
know our every move and what we're doing. Um,
Mm.
so it can become easy to overshare, and just, and the fact too of, me being 39, I've been, so open about having a disability again because it's a physical disability and visible. So it's like I have to talk about it in many spaces. And
Mm.
so it's not a big deal for me to talk about it at this point. But it may not be that way for everybody. It still may be
Mm.
uncomfortable to talk about, especially for people who may have acquired their disabilities later in life.
Right.
I've been doing this all of my life. It's all I know. So it is
Right.
part of who
Same.
I am. So,
Mm-hmm.
but for somebody, the person who has a spinal cord injury they acquired a couple months ago, and
Yeah.
is starting the dating thing, it might be, uh, something uncomfortable for them to talk about right away. So
Mm-hmm.
it's just,
Mm.
goes back to the self-talk that we have with ourselves, and what we're telling ourselves, and how we are feeling about ourselves, that is really key to take note of here. So,
Right.
uh,
Right.
yeah. So, thank you so much for this conversation. This
Yeah.
has been
Loving it.
great. Yeah. So, we are wrapping up this portion of the conversation. We are going to continue to record a part two where we will discuss more about the myths of about sex, love, and disability, and just different tips that people can utilize, I guess you could say,
Mm-hmm.
to find love, and if love is, where love is, and how they can find it.
Mm-hmm.
So, Dr. Fynan, thank you for joining me for this episode, and for everyone
My
listening.
pleasure.
Yeah, and for everyone listening, just make sure that you are tuned in for part two. And just before we go, can you tell people where they can find you on social media for to see some of your great content that you post as well?
Yes, you can find me on Clubhouse, my new
Yes.
addiction. At my handle is Dr. Fynan, so DrFYNAN, and it's the same handle, Dr. Fynan on Instagram. And then my website is www.drfynan.com.
Yes.
And I plan on rolling out some content, free resources to really just fill up and support my people, my community, and love on everyone. And I'm also offering free consultations and clarity calls if they're looking for a bit more support in working with me directly. So
Oh,
I would
that's
love to
great.
hear from anyone.
Yes, that's great. And thank you so much again for your time today. And
Thank you.
everybody, tune into part two. You don't want to miss it. We are going to have another great conversation there. So thank you for joining me today, and we will talk to you soon.